supercars are incredible pieces of machinery. They cost as much as a house and move as fast as you can without a pilot's license. However, there was always one glaring problem. They sucked to drive. Cramped interiors, oddly placed controls, shifters that took all your strength just to get into second gear, and once you finally get on the road, blind spots that could hide a Boeing 747. That's all if they even ran, which they didn't. Ever. That is until 1991. And this is what they came up with. The Acura NSX, or in every other country, the Honda NSX. And this is the story of how it all began. In the 1980s, Honda was on an engineering conquest, supplying motors and suspension for McLaren's unstoppable F1 team, and creating cars that just lasted forever. To celebrate all this success and show the world what they were capable of, they set out to make a halo car. Something that could show off Honda's engineering talent and launch the Acura brand in the States. The goal, however, wasn't just to compete with Japanese counterparts. While Toyota made the Supra, Mazda made the RX-7, and Nissan the GTR, Honda wanted more. They wanted to take on the world. So Ferrari, Lamborghini, and anything Porsche could make was the new target. Honda started by contacting Italian design firm Pininfarina, the same company behind most Ferrari designs and the best ones, such as the Ferrari F40, the 308, the Testarossa, and so many more. Because if you can't beat them, you might as well join them, and they're one of the best in the game. Together, they came up with the Honda Pininfarina Experimental. And out of this odd-looking concept came the stylish and sleek NSX that we know today. At the time, supercars looked fast and were fast. Everything else was an afterthought. Porsches had the steering wheel off to the side. Ferrari's pedals
the pedals are moved to the right. I mean, I've never sat in anything that's just so misthought out.
It's either the engineers gave up or didn't care at all. And when I said earlier that they never ran, that wasn't an understatement. People who had just paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for their car couldn't even get it out of the garage. However, this was Honda, the company that makes cars that just work every day. So there would be no compromises in usability or comfortability of the vehicle. All the controls would be right where they should be. The seats comfortable. A car you could get in and drive, yet would still be able to hang with the grades. With nice seats and plenty of room. At least as much as a two-seater car can go. The glass canopy was famously modeled after the F-16 fighter jet, where the pilot is far forward on the craft out of necessity to be able to see everything going on as you break the sound barrier. Or in this case, get cut off at a light by a Nissan Sentra. But Car and Driver did call it a fighter jet for the road, which is pretty cool. The long tail and raised wing help keep the car planted and stable at speeds in excess of 160 miles an hour, even with a strong crosswind. The design can be summed up to be simple and purposeful. Not as crazy as other cars in its class, but it has aged well. As for the chassis, many materials were considered, like reinforced steel, carbon fiber. However, Honda famously landed on aluminum. No car up until this point had an aluminum chassis, and it was largely thought to be not feasible. Aluminum suppliers at the time didn't even want to work with Honda because they thought that they would bail out on their contracts. So what did Honda do? Well, they built their own factory to work on aluminum, created a new method of extrusion that made the difficult aluminum easy and precise to work with. A technique that we still use today to make cars, but that wasn't enough. They also pioneered new ways to weld and stamp aluminum panels. They did all this because they believed it would result in the best possible chassis. The entire project can be summed up as a car built by engineers, not accountants, like every other car is in the world. When most would have been satisfied, Honda modeled the rigidity of the chassis and designed parts on the Cray 2 supercomputer. This is another first, and it's hard to imagine a car today designed without a computer, but the idea was pioneered by Honda at the time, who reprogrammed the entire thing just for this one task. Now all that's great, but a supercar does need a heart. And Honda in their typical fashion pulled once again from their Formula One experience after making one of the most successful engines in the game. What they came up with was a 3-liter V6 producing 275 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque. That might not sound like a lot, but even to this day, it's one of the highest horsepower liter engines out there, beating the Corvette ZR1, Porsche 911 Carrera 2, and even the later model Ferrari 348. Screaming to over 8,000 RPMs, you would think this motor would be like any other supercar motor, but it's a Honda, which means it will last forever. This one's got 200,000 miles on it and going strong, with owners pushing 400,000 on their cars. You wouldn't want to do that in a Ferrari if you could. Titanium connecting rods, which was a first in any car, but common in Formula One motors. The revolutionary VTEC system that virtually every automaker has ripped off. A variable induction intake system. This engine truly is special. And contrary to popular belief, it actually shares no parts with any other Honda engine. It produced more horsepower than Ferrari's V8s at the time, yet managed to get almost 30 miles per gallon if you had enough restraint to keep your foot out of it. Now, the most impressive part of the NSX is easily its suspension. Honda engineers wanted to make the suspension weigh very little while still being sporty and comfortable to ride in, which at the time was a complete oxymoron. The engineers landed on a double wishbone setup with coilovers and anti-roll bars both front and rear, similar to what their Formula One car at the time had, but with a revolutionary new compliance pivot that would reduce the dreaded bump steer and keep the car stable and comfortable over bumps even while the car was turning. To make it all lightweight, they used aluminum extrusions, honeycomb designs, and pioneered even more advancements in aluminum and suspension manufacturing. Since the chassis was so rigid, engineers didn't have to work around it and could perfectly calibrate even the most minute aspects. And to do so, they had world F1 champion Ayrton Senna, Bobby Rahal, and Satoru Nakajima test the car for over 8 months at various tracks including the Nürburgring and Suzuka Raceway to get every ounce of potential out of it, and in the end, each driver had to sign off on it. Senna, being the most famous of the bunch, is widely regarded as the greatest motorsports driver who ever lived. I could easily make an entire video of his legacy, but the short of it was, his expertise of the feel of a car is what helped make the NSX suspension not just great, but world-beating. Few sports cars today wouldn't be left for dead in a corner by an NSX with modern rubber on it. It was so good that Gordon Murray, the designer of the incredible McLaren F1, based most of the car off the NSX, from the suspension to the drive-by-wire system to general chassis dynamics. If it wasn't for the NSX, we wouldn't have the F1 we do today. And when he was test benching the very best cars the world had to offer, such as the Porsche 959, the Bugatti EB110, Ferrari F40, the Jag XJ220, he went on to say, "The moment I drove the little NSX, all the benchmark cars, Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, I had been using as references in the development of my car vanished from my mind. The NSX's ride quality and handling would become our new design target." When the NSX hit the roads, it was an immediate success, and almost overnight cemented Honda as the direct threat to Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche.
Because when we entered Formula One racing, we wanted more than just a trophy to show for it.
Car and Driver put it against the ZR1, Ferrari 348, Lotus Esprit Turbo, and Porsche 911 Carrera 4, and it blew them all away. They went on to say, the winning NSX has it all. Stunning looks, a comfortable and inviting cockpit, a Rev Forever engine that's perfectly happy motoring around town, and confidence-inspiring handling. Motor Trend said it's the best sports car the world has ever produced. Anytime, any place, any price. We spent over 100 years developing the automobile, and after driving the NSX, it's been worth the wait. But it wasn't just journalists praising the car for how it drove. Honda wanted to make sure its competition knew they meant business. And they went on to take first in the hardest and most dangerous race in the world, the 24 Hours of Le Mans in '95 for the GT2 class, driven by Keiichi Tsushi, aka the Drift King, a Japanese hero who is credited with inventing the concept of drifting a car, something near and dear to our hearts at Driftin Donuts. It set a record for most consecutive GT500 wins ever, a record that still stands to this day, which, fun fact, Lexus almost tied the record in 2017 and was one race away, and Honda came back with the new NSX and took first place. They were second ever to win pole and take the fastest lap in every round of a season, won 36 races, 45 pole positions, 3 teams and 2 drivers' champions, finished runner-up in the drivers' champions 6 times when it didn't win, and even 30 plus years later, it's one of the most successful cars to ever enter the GT series. A GT 300 win, sub 8-minute Nürburgring record, countless other records and wins set, the NSX went on to forge its own legacy as a pop culture icon and world-beating supercar. They made Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche all step up their game to compete, making their models better to drive and more reliable. The NSX fulfilled its goal and has inspired engineers working on all sorts of sports cars to design better. The shifter system in the 2005 Ford GT
The shifter is brilliant in every...
was based off the NSX. The 2022 Z06 has an aluminum mid-engine chassis with titanium connecting rods, being called by many a spiritual successor. Despite all its accomplishments in engineering, the NSX only ever sold roughly 19,000 cars worldwide, and Honda lost money on each one of them. Development costs were astronomical, but the impact cannot be overstated. 30 years later, the world has forgotten about these cars. Save for a small cult following enthusiasts, we will probably never see another car like it today. Modern sports cars are all the same, and taking risks to innovate is shut down by accountants and stockholders. The things that make these older cars so special, like the lack of power steering that lets you feel every bit of what the front tires are doing, the bolt-action feeling of the manual shifter and high-revving naturally aspirated motor, don't make sense to anyone who isn't a die-hard enthusiast. And even if it did, modern crash tests and emissions regulations make it a once-in-a-lifetime vehicle. Most people simply won't understand what makes a car like this special. They'll only see an old Honda with a raised wing that's low to the ground. But if you even remotely like modern sports cars, 30 years later, it's still the benchmark to beat. And this silver one is actually mine, so follow me on Driftin Donuts as I do all sorts of things to it.